1838 opened as a year of mourning in the Confederation upon news of the death of David Ricardo, the émigré economist who helped chart a course for the Argentine economy. His role in helping reform the Confederation's spending to be oriented towards a laissez-faire rejection of tariffs to boost government income helped give liberal ideas serious political clout, as well as an arena where the liberal unitarios held sway. For de Rosas, he was preoccupied with more foreboding news. The Treaty of La Paz, signed on New Year's Day 1840, had solidified the legitimacy of the confederation established between Peru and Bolivia. This new confederation combined the two Andean powers in a move that threatened the balance of power in South America, albeit being lopsided in favor of the Bolivian government. The de Rosas regime looked on with concern, wanting to eliminate this newfound rival holding the Jujuy region, but as of yet, finding no allies to help in their cause. Chile and Brazil remained distrustful of de Rosas and his national ambitions, while Paraguay continued to operate as a rogue Rousseau-esque state of nature, the product of a failed social experiment in creating a utopian society. Thus, the Argentine Confederation was on its own if it intended to reclaim Jujuy. De Rosas, never one to cower or simper before a challenge, made it clear to the caudillos that he would exert the Confederation's power to humiliate Peru-Bolivia and establish Argentina as the predominant power in South America. The caudillos of Entre Rios and Corrientes, impressed by de Rosas' audacity, agreed to support the conflict, although some public speeches by Lorenzo Pellegrini, condemning the bastard child of Bolivia, made de Rosas' war plans clear to Argentina's neighbors, much to de Rosas' embarrassment but with little backlash. In an effort to further stoke tensions in the region as justification, de Rosas established a new assimilation policy for Jujuy, laying out the necessity for locals to embrace Argentine culture, further ruffling feathers in the Bolivian capital of La Paz. Furthermore, de Rosas was displaying his authority as being the leader of the Confederation, encouraging immigrants to the area, becoming rancheros, soldiers, and caudillos that would be loyal to him and his government in Buenos Aires, rather than the collective caudillo confederation as a whole. Upon receiving word in January of 1841 that a border skirmish could be staged, thereby granting Argentina the justification necessary to start the war outright, de Rosas was ready to rally the caudillo forces when the liberal Unitario faction requested that the war be postponed until the military had time to prepare and the economy to stabilize. Furthermore, they argued, Chile also had a vested interest in crushing Peru-Bolivia, and may declare their own independent war with Brazil's help if enough time were to pass. Thus, in light of their reasonable protests, de Rosas was willing to wait, instead letting the Unitarios develop new theories and ideas based on David Ricardo's experiences in the United Kingdom, on investment in stocks, on how to garner trust and growth with foreign investment. Soon, winter gave way to summer, and summer gave way to winter again. Still, no sign of Chile making its move against Peru-Bolivia, and de Rosas grew restless as he feared that his bold claims before the Confederation might appear like hot air unless his word could soon be followed by action. So, in March of 1842, de Rosas, on behalf of the Argentine Confederation as a whole, of course, declared war upon Peru-Bolivia. He chose his words carefully, thinking about how, if he were shrewd in his wording and laying out his demands, he might be able to take more of the region than what had been initially claimed by the Confederation in the past. If Argentina was able to take the whole region of Jujuy, it would form a natural barrier and a firm border with Bolivia. As he mulled this fact over, he officially declared that the cause of the war was to restore balance to the Andes by ordering the dissolution of the Peru-Bolivian Confederation. Understanding that time was of the essence, the professional forces under General Pacheco were immediately sent to cross over the Andes to descend into Bolivia and crush the Bolivian army before it had time to properly regroup. The first reports to reach de Rosas' ears were not hopeful. After Pacheco's forces suffered heavy attrition crossing the Andes into Potosi, the Bolivian army stood at full might in neighboring Oruro, and the South Peruvian army was less than 1,000 miles away along the coast. Pacheco's foreboding reports, making passing mention of abandoned ranches and buildings in light of a mobilization of Bolivian forces, caused the Confederation to make a hasty mobilization of their own forces in anticipation of an early defeat at Oruro. The mobilization turned out to be unnecessary. Although the Bolivian forces had regrouped by Lake Pupo, and the Peruvian forces were not far off, Bolivian forces were taking their time in properly forming up. Believing that the Argentinians would prefer besieging Jujuy to take up defensive positions, the Bolivians instead focused on providing proper training to the farmers and rancheros who had been mobilized and wait leisurely for the Peruvian troops to arrive before launching an attack. These assumptions proved fatal. The South Peruvian army, receiving early reports of the Argentinians arriving in Potosi, marched to Jujuy in an effort to cut off supplies from Argentina. The North Peruvian army, seeing how close the Argentinians were to the Bolivian capital, turned instead to La Paz to set up defensive fortifications to ensure the capital did not fall. As a result, when Pacheco's men descended on the sleepy Bolivian camp by Lake Pupo, they did not receive a fierce battle as much as a massacre. Many of the men not being professional soldiers, the mayhem of battle caused by the pincer attack from the west and the south, combined with a small dust storm caused by the Argentine caballeros in the early summer heat, was devastating to the Bolivian forces. When the dust of battle had settled, Pacheco estimated in his boastful report that the Bolivians had lost up to 5 times as many men with each clash in the fighting, a number that was not too far off. The result was the complete and utter collapse of the professional Bolivian army. Pacheco's haughty claims sat well in Buenos Aires, as the mobilized forces under Lorenzo Pellegrini made their way north to Jujuy to confront the South Peruvian forces besieging Argentinian Jujuy. By July, most of the Confederation's allies, Corrientes and Entre Rios, with Uruguay not too far behind, had made their way to the front lines, besieging out small fortifications and holding along Jujuy, which was soon added as one of the war goals of de Rosas, the restoration of the lost territory of La Plata. Meanwhile, Pacheco's forces defeated the North Peruvian army and began besieging La Paz. After word of the defeat at Oruro had reached the ears of Bolivia's leader, Andres de Santa Cruz, he and his government had fled north to Lima to rally Peru into mobilizing its forces for a swift counterattack. Thus, although there was nothing of strategic value in taking La Paz, the symbolic victory in taking the Bolivian capital would highlight Bolivia's weakness and perhaps cause Peru to reconsider being dominated by de Santa Cruz's regime. Nonetheless, there were some cumbersome obstacles to the war. In particular, the lack of communication among the Argentinian allies. The army of Corrientes, for example, refused to cooperate or acknowledge the authority of Pellegrini, who they viewed as a peasant upstart and a glory hound. So much so that when Pellegrini ordered the Allied forces to attack the South Peruvian army in Urquía, the Army de Corrientes sent various trivial excuses, while Pellegrini, unwilling to be humiliated by retreat, stormed the Peruvian positions in the mountains of Urquía and was only able to gain victory through the incompetence of the Peruvian commander. Pellegrini, triumphant and haughty, became unbearably arrogant in his reports to Buenos Aires, laying out an outlandish story that he ordered the Army de Corrientes to remain in Rivadavia to prevent further loss of life, and that he defeated the South Peruvian army single-handedly, which, to his credit, he did. As a result, The forces of Corrientes would remain out of the conflict for the remainder of the war, much to the chagrin and frustration of de Rosas. Unfortunately, this incident and similar such incidents did not go unnoticed. Mario de Cadiz, a Spanish news correspondent in the Americas, was one of the few journalists who reported on the war, as many European nations had no interest in the conflict, instead focusing on the Oriental crisis in the East. Spain alone followed de Cadiz's briefings, as they had some passing interest in their former colonies. Regarding the mismanagement of the war by both sides, de Cadiz wrote the following: "Although I have nothing but praise for the courage of the regular soldiers, the behavior of the commanding officers is abysmal. Mutinies and insubordinations continue to hamper Argentinian efforts, while Buenos Aires continues to add more and more demands to their campaign. With all the strife between the various caudillos to claim glory and honor, it is of great wonder why the Argentine Confederation has not collapsed into civil war, if not for the iron fist of de Rosas." At home, de Rosas was able to keep spirits high. While many of the Federales continued to fight on the front lines, the Unitarios remained at home to keep the economy at manageable levels and continue to foster domestic industry to build up the country after the war ended. At last, on the 23rd of September 1843, after a year and a half of fighting, the Peruvian government compelled de Santa Cruz to not only make peace with the Argentine Confederation, but also recognize the independence of Peru. With the Bolivian army destroyed and the Peruvians demanding their independence, de Santa Cruz was forced to concede to all of de Rosas' demands. For his own part, de Rosas was only too pleased to accept the Bolivian offer of peace, with the Unitarios constantly bringing him reports on the Confederation's budget and the growing number of loans to the various great powers to support the bungled war effort. Nonetheless, the war was immensely beneficial, not only for de Rosas' power, but for the Confederation as a whole. As de Rosas was making his dream of a reunited Rio de la Plata a reality, the Confederation was established as one of the great, if not the greatest power in South America, perhaps second only to the Empire of Brazil. Time would tell if the realization of de Rosas' dream would lead to a bright future for Argentina.